I want to welcome everybody to this webinar, which is jointly hosted by Hope Rises International and the Leprosy Mission. And we hope that we'll be able to discuss quite a bit about the leprosy vaccine known as LepVax and answer some questions. It's a complex subject and the history is very long, so we can't go into too much detail. But I want to just give some introductions. Firstly, to the panel. I'm chairing the panel. My name is Paul Saunderson. I've been the medical director of what was then American Leprosy Missions, now Hope Rises, since around the year 2000, which is actually when the vaccine project started. So I've been a bystander for all the years of its development. And one of the things that is rather interesting is that at that time, MDT had been available for about 20 years. And there was some frustration that MDT was very good at treating patients, but didn't seem to be stopping transmission. So there was a lot of interest in ways to reduce the transmission of leprosy and stop the number of new cases appearing each year. So that was when the board actually of American Leprosy Missions really became interested in the idea of a vaccine. And at the same time, as many of you may remember, there was a lot of research into genetics and genomes. The human genome was discovered, was published, and also the M-Lepre genome was worked out by Professor Stuart Cole and others. So there was a lot of new research and new possibilities that could help to develop a vaccine. So now it's a long time later, over 25 years, and we can ask why it has taken so long, because we're not even yet at a full clinical trial of a vaccine. And some people think that, some people ask why, if a COVID vaccine could be developed and deployed in 1 year, why are we so slow with the leprosy vaccine? And I think I would say that there are really two main answers to that. One is that leprosy, the bacillus causing leprosy, is extremely slow growing, and it's a very slow disease clinically. And therefore, trials and studies of leprosy take a long time. Any clinical trial takes 5 years or more, whereas the COVID trials were all took a few weeks. And probably a related fact is that there was a lot of political pressure for a COVID vaccine, which led to a lot of funding becoming available. So leprosy is less of an urgent political problem, and there's less funding. With the COVID vaccine, because of the money being made available, a lot of clinical trials could actually run concurrently or very quickly, one after another. Whereas with the leprosy vaccine, we've had to do one trial and present all the results and persuade people to give the next lot of money. So there are big differences, and certainly progress is slower than we had hoped. But we'll go into more of the details of how the vaccine has been developed. And we have 4 panelists. First is going to be Dr. Veronica Schmitz, who is a researcher and an immunologist in Rio de Janeiro at the Oswaldo Cruz Institute, also known as Fiocruz. And so she is the principal investigator of the clinical trials that are getting underway in Brazil. And after that, Dr. Becky Revoir will talk about the practicalities of the vaccine development. She is the LepVax program coordinator for Hope Rises International, and she has a lot of experience of developing of dealing with both academic and industry settings and mycobacterial research. So she will talk about practicalities. And then Dr. Alice Cruz and Dr. Paola Brando will talk about the perspective of the leprosy patients. Alice Cruz is a social anthropologist and worked as the United Nations Special Rapporteur for the elimination of discrimination against people with leprosy, and is now working for the Sasakawa Health Foundation as an advisor on human rights issues. And Paola Brando is a person affected by leprosy, but she's a nurse with a PhD in public health and is a professor at the State University of Rio de Janeiro in the College of Nursing. So without further ado, we'll get started. We have the possibility of questions and answers, and there is a box titled Q&A at the bottom of the screen, so you can write questions in there. There are too many people to have an open debate with open microphones, but we'll try to answer the questions that come up. And if there are complex issues, then it is possible to discuss by email later. So, yeah, let me then first ask Dr. Veronica to present her views. Well, she's going to present on the underlying science and the current work in Brazil. So thank you, Veronica.
Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. Good morning and afternoon, everyone. First, I would like sincerely to thank you, team, for the invitation and all organizers for the opportunity to speak with you today. It's a pleasure to share some of the science behind LepVax and how this vaccine may contribute to the global goal of zero leprosy. My presentation today is entitled The LepVax, the Underlying Science. To begin, I'd like to briefly explain what LepVax is. LepVax is a vaccine specifically designed to fight leprosy. Unlike the BCG vaccine, which was originally developed for tuberculosis and offers only partial protection against leprosy, LepVax was created exclusively to target Mycobacterium leprae. LepVax is also a protein-based vaccine. This means it uses small harmless pieces of the bacterium to train the immune system to recognize and respond to the infection safely and effectively. For this next slide, I'd like to explain in a very simple way how LepVax works step by step. First, the vaccine is administered. Important, LepVax does not contain the live bacteria capable of causing disease. Instead, it contains small and harmless pieces of leprosy called antigens. Second, the immune system recognizes the antigens and begins to learn. In a way, the body creates a memory of what the bacteria looks like. Third, this process activates important defense cells, especially T lymphocytes, which learn how to recognize and attack the real bacteria. And finally, if the person is later exposed to leprosy, the immune system is already prepared to respond faster and more efficiently. I like to compare this to fight training. The vaccine introduces the immune system to the enemy in advance. So when the real bacteria appears, the body already knows how to fight back. To better understand the importance of LepVax, it's helpful to look at the current vaccine development landscape for leprosy. One important point is that, despite the enormous global impact of leprosy, there are currently only 2 vaccine platforms especially being explored for this disease. This represents a very limited pipeline when compared with what we see for various diseases. For many variant factors, we now have a broader portfolio of vaccines technologies, including the live attenuates, inactivated vaccines, and more recently, mRNA platforms. In contrast, leprosy vaccine development remains extremely restricted. As Paul said before, there are several reasons for this. First, there are major technical and scientific challenges. MLab cannot be cultured in artificial media, which makes laboratory studies and antigen discovery much more difficult. We also still have gaps in our understanding of protective immunity and correlates of protection leprosy. In addition, there are important operational challenges. Leprosy is a neglected tropical disease that mainly affects vulnerable populations, often low resource settings, making large-scale clinical trials more difficult to conduct. And finally, there is the issue of funding compared with disease considered global emergencies. Leprosy receives far less investment from both public and private sectors, which directly impacts innovation and the expansion of the vaccine pipeline. So this slide emphasizes not only where we are today, but also how much opportunity still exists for innovation in leprosy vaccine development. So far, I have introduced what LepVax is and why new vaccine approach are urgently needed in leprosy. Now, I would like to briefly show the scientific foundation behind this vaccine and why it has generated so much interest. The vaccine composition. The antigen component of LepVax is LepF1, a recombinant fusion protein that combines 4 MLEP-specific antigens into a single immunogen. The adjuvant component is GLASE, a synthetic toll-like receptor 4 agonist formulated in an oil and water emulsion. GLASE was selected to bias the immune response towards a Th1 type cellular immunity, which is critical for controlling intracellular mycobacterial infections. I'd like to highlight the clinical evidence. The phase 1 trial, an open-label antigen dose escalation phase 1 trial, was conducted to evaluate safety, tolerability, and immunogenicity of LepVax in healthy adult volunteers. 24 volunteers were enrolled, and 21 completed the full regimen of 3 injections. The trial demonstrated that LepVax was acceptable and well tolerated, with no safety signals that would preclude further development. Immunogenicity assessments revealed that LepVax elicited robust antigen-specific cellular immune responses, characterized by production of Th1 cytokines, including interferon gamma. One of the most exciting aspects of the LepVax comes from what we learn in preclinical studies. These findings suggest that vaccination may have potential benefits at different stages of the natural history of MLEP infection. Traditionally, we think about vaccines only as a way to prevent disease before exposure. But in leprosy, the situation may be more complex and also more promising. We can potentially think about vaccination strategy for people who have never been exposed, individuals with latent infection, patients with active disease, and even people who have already completed the treatment. This opens the possibility that the vaccines could contribute not only to progression, complications, recurrence, and transmission. Importantly, in leprosy, the goal is not only to reduce infection and transmission. We are also trying to reduce nerve damage, chronic inflammation, and the disabilities that can persist even after bacterial cure. This broader view opens new possibilities for how vaccines may support the goal of zero leprosy. In this final section, I would like to share the current status of LepVax project in Brazil. Over the past years, important milestones have already been achieved, include ethical and regulatory approvals, which represent essential steps towards clinical implementation. At the moment, one of the key pending activities is the production of a new clinical-grade vaccine lot. This is a critical requirement before moving forward to the next phase of the study. The current depends on securing additional funding. Once this step is completed, the next major milestones will include a visa approval for the new clinical lot and the initiation of the participant recruitment in Brazil. So, while important scientific and regulatory foundations are already in place, continued investment is essential to move this promising vaccine candidate from preclinical success toward clinical evaluation and public health impact. Before I finish, I would like to acknowledge the sincere thanks of all people and institutions who have made this work possible. Developing vaccines for neglected diseases such as leprosy is never the result of a single person or single institution. It requires collaboration across many areas: science, clinical research, regulatory affairs, manufacturing, funding, and community engagement. I'm deeply grateful to our collaborators, researchers, clinical students, technical teams, participating institutions, and funding organizations for the commitment to advance innovation in leprosy research. A very special acknowledgement to Dr. Beck Rivoire, whose collaboration and dedication have been instrumental to this work. I would like to recognize the patients and the communities affected by leprosy, who remain the central motivation behind this work. We hope that initiatives like LepVax can contribute not only to scientific progress, but also to reduce transmission, prevent disabilities, and bring us closer to the goal of zero leprosy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Veronica. That was extremely helpful and clear. Now we're going to move on to Dr. Becky Revoire, who will talk about the practical aspects of the work that has been supported by American Leprosy Missions and Hope Rises over these last 25 years. Thanks, Becky.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the Leprosy Mission for bringing us together. After my talk, Alice and her colleague Paula will show us what leprosy means to the people that it touches. And Veronica just recently walked us through the science. So my job is to talk about what it takes to turn this vaccine into something real, something that actually reaches people. And I want to be clear about where we are and where we're not. So let me start. On the left, what we know. In lab studies, as Veronica mentioned, this vaccine blocks the bacteria that causes leprosy. It also slows down nerve damage, and nerve damage is what leads to disability. And when we give it to people for the first time in a safety trial in the United States, there were no serious problems. Oops. On the right, what we still need to find out. We haven't tested it yet in a country where leprosy exists. We don't know yet whether it actually prevents leprosy in real life. And we'd like to get it down to fewer than 3 doses. This vaccine shows real promise, but it's not finished yet. Here's a realistic timeline for where we are. The first safety trial was completed in 2020. That was a real milestone, the first time this vaccine was given to people. Right now in 2026, manufacturing is in queue. Our partner, Cordis in South Korea, is ready to produce the new vaccine batch, and that will begin once funding for the phase 1 trial is secure.
Becky, can you switch to full screen?
Oh, yes.
Did they click at the bottom?
Thank you, Paul. Better?
Not yet. Yeah, that's it. Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No problem.
Okay. So some of you may be wondering why it's taking so long. Paul alluded to this earlier, but I'll be direct. The previous batch expired and had to be made again. Well, that was frustrating, but it's a normal part of vaccine development. The phase 1b trial has been approved by Anvisa and Brazil's regulatory authority. Once funded and manufactured, 54 volunteers in Rio de Janeiro will be the first to receive this vaccine in a country where leprosy actually exists. After that, come larger phase 2-3 trials and a 7-year window to answer the big question, does it prevent leprosy? Following regulatory approval and WHO pre-qualification, the vaccine could realistically reach people around 2038. That's a long timeline, but the delivery infrastructure is already being built by the PEP programs today. For the people in this room who run health programs, you're probably wondering how this would work on the ground. 2 goals, 1 vaccine. This vaccine has 2 purposes, and both of them matter. The first is prevention, vaccinating people before they get infected. We'd start with the close contacts of someone newly diagnosed, and then widen to communities where leprosy is common. The second is just as important, helping people who already have leprosy. In animal studies, this vaccine slowed down the nerve damage that causes disability. That's significant. We plan to test this in people in future trials. So this isn't only about protecting the next generation. It could help people living with leprosy wondering how this would work on the ground. 3 things. It's a standard shot, same as a chair, and it ships in a normal refrigerator alongside other medicines you already receive. There's nothing exotic, there's nothing that requires new infrastructure, and that's by design. LepVax is part of the toolkit. There are new exciting drugs coming for leprosy, and many of you are already running PEP programs, giving a single dose of an antibiotic to people in close contact with a patient. A vaccine doesn't replace any of that. It adds something different, long-term protection. Drugs treat, PEP provides short prevention. A vaccine could provide lasting immunity. And here's a practical point. The PEP programs you're building today, the contact tracing, the community engagement, the health worker training is exactly the infrastructure a vaccine will need. So it's being laid, the groundwork is being laid right now. So what does it actually take to get from where we are to the trial starting? Let me walk you through our priorities. Number 1, and this is the most important, it's funding. The phase 1 trial cannot begin without committed funding. Manufacturing can't start and volunteers can't be enrolled, so none of it moves forward without this. Number 2 is manufacturing. Cordis in South Korea will produce the new vaccine batch once funding is in place. Quality testing and release have to be completed before we can dose the first volunteer. Number 3 is implementing the trial itself, led by Fiocruz with Biomanguinus as sponsor following regulatory review. Beyond the trial, we're also working on 2 longer-term priorities. We need to identify a commercial development partner, someone who can take LepVax from the clinical supply to global scale production and distribution. And we need to strengthen our partnerships, deepening coordination with Fiocruz, with AHI, with the Sasakawa Health Foundation, with the WHO, and governments in endemic countries. These 5 priorities are how this vaccine moves from the lab to people's lives. For the government officials and program leaders here today, this slide is for you. A vaccine raises real questions that every country will answer differently. Who should get it first, close contacts or whole communities? How will it be paid for? How do we trace contacts without creating stigma? And where does it fit, next to PEP, next to BCG, or as part of childhood immunization? You don't need to wait for the vaccine to be approved to start thinking about these questions. PEP programs and national disease strategies are already creating the frameworks. So what can you do? If you're a government leader, start talking about immunization readiness. If you work for an NGO or ILEP organization, share what this vaccine can and can't do yet. Help people affected by leprosy feel ownership over this project. And everyone here can advocate, can partner, and fund. Please put any questions that you have in the chat. We want to hear from you. In closing, I'm closing with a quote from Arthur Custodio, who leads Morhan, an organization of people affected by leprosy in Brazil. We need innovation like this vaccine to end Hansen's disease. A vaccine specifically designed for leprosy is no longer a dream. It's in development and it's within reach. Thank you, and back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much indeed, Becky. That was very clear, and we're still waiting for questions. If you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box, and we can go through them at the end. But Becky's last slide leads us nicely into the next presentation, which is jointly by Dr. Alice Cruz and Dr. Paulo Brandao. And Paulo is someone who works with Morhan, the organization that Becky quoted at the end there, the patients organization in Brazil. So let me introduce Alice Cruz, and I'm not sure which one is going to speak first, but Dr. Alice Cruz is a social anthropologist, and Paula Brandao is someone affected by leprosy, working as an advocate for those affected. So I'll leave you two to present together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if I may suggest, I would like Paula to close the webinar because she's going to share the direct experience from persons affected by Hansen's disease. So Paula, what do you think?
Thank you, Alice. Good morning, Paul and everyone. Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to be here and sharing experience and hopes for a vaccine that can protect people from Hansen's disease. When Alice invited me to this webinar, I wondered, from which place should I speak? From the place of someone affected by the disease, of a family and community nurse, of a researcher, or of a citizen? So I decided to begin by remembering something from my childhood. I had a neighbor, a 30-year-old man, who was blind because of measles, a disease preventable by a vaccine. Even so, he rode his bicycle through the neighborhood, inspiring everyone with his sweetness and courage in a time and place without adequate health resources. I also remember how the vaccine protected my brother at 7 years old from becoming seriously ill with measles. More recently, we lived through the COVID-19 pandemic and saw science develop vaccines in record time. In Brazil, the National Immunization Program, created in 1973, is recognized for this excellence. Today, 32 vaccines are offered free of charge through the Unified Health System. Ensure protection for children, adolescents, adults, and older people. As a citizen and health profession, I reaffirm vaccination is a right it's a protection, it's a care. Every person has the right to access technologies that prevent transmissible disease. And as someone affected by Hansen's disease, I ask myself, why, if it is a millenary disease with its causative agent known for more than 150 years, do we still not have a vaccine? When will we have a vaccine for Hansen's disease? A drop of hope appeared when the four of us, Tiago, Francilene, Brenda, and I, were introduced to the LepVax vaccine project and invited to follow the clinical trial. We received the training at the Lauro de Souza Lima Institute to understand the process of creating a vaccine and to discuss how we would participate as observers, bringing our perspective as people affected by the disease. It was an innovative experience. People affected by a disease accompanying the birth of a technology that could contribute both to the elimination of Hansen's disease and to the reduction of the physical disabilities it causes. But nothing happened. Not the vaccine, not the clinical trial, not our participation. There is why we need funding and the development of new health technologies, such as a vaccine, to be a priority. We, people affected by Hansen's disease, have the right to protection and care. And then more questions arise. How long will Hansen's disease reach continue to be neglected? How long will we remain at the end of the line for new health technologies? How long will we wait for a vaccine that protects us, our families, and our communities? Thank you very much. Alice, thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula. As usual, your testimony is of the essence to understand not only the project, but also its importance. So thank you so much. Well, so first of all, I would really like to thank the Leprosy Mission International and Hope Prizes International, but also Fiocruz for organizing this webinar. I want to thank Dr. Paul Sanderson for facilitating the webinar and also to congratulate everyone on their very clear presentations that show the importance of the LepVax project. Secondly, I want to also appreciate the organizers for creating an opportunity for a dialogue between scientists, persons affected by leprosy, and apologies to my colleagues in Brazil, but I'm going to use the term leprosy, and all of us interested and committed to ending leprosy, but also to making sure that persons affected by leprosy enjoy their human rights. So this is a first dialogue between scientists and all of us. And I think this is really important. And I want to emphasize that even though this dialogue came from a very specific situation for a very specific project, so it is a bit spontaneous, I would like to suggest that we try to make this type of dialogues more regular and systematic. And I'm going to explain why. Last year, during the International Leprosy Congress, many persons affected by leprosy and leaders of representative organizations participated in the ILC. And that was certainly a major step forward when we think that the International Leprosy Congresses, they go back to the late 19th century. So indeed, 2025 was an important year in regards to breaking some of these barriers between scientists and persons affected by leprosy. But sharing physical spaces, it's not the same as co-production of knowledge. So I think that where we are right now, it is important to realize this, that we need to continue to break barriers and make sure that science and experience are on the same have the same hierarchical value. So we need to continue to push for dialogue, but also sharing of knowledge, resources, and aiming at the co-production of knowledge. And I'm going to explain a little bit ahead how the LepVax project has been working on that. So I think that we need to go also beyond in the last I don't know, we can call it some decades, we've been pushing for participation of persons affected by leprosy in knowledge production, but such participation has been more about consultation. So knowledge is produced and then persons affected by leprosy are called to, give their opinion, and mostly on social issues, specifically what the leprosy community calls stigma and discrimination, putting together two things that are very different. So I think that we need to also make sure that, one, participation is meaningful and goes beyond consultation. And secondly, that it's not just about social issues, but it also encompasses scientific and medical issues. And again, the LepVax project is a good example of that. The other thing I would like to mention in this regard is that we've also seen in recent years a concern about among some leprosy organizations to promote what it's called participatory research. But again, it's more about giving a specific role to persons affected by leprosy and not really sharing the production of knowledge with them. And in that regard, I would like to mention a program that Sasakawa Health Foundation launched a couple of years ago, where research was completely in the hands of persons affected by leprosy, from design to implementation and dissemination, and it was very successful. So I really think that we need to push a bit more and make sure that, again, scientists and persons affected by leprosy are in a place where they share resources and knowledge production. And why is this important? Well, for many reasons, but I'm just going to focus on three of them here. First of all, because it's the right of persons affected by leprosy to participate in all issues that concern their lives. Persons affected by leprosy should have the right to a voice and choice in scientific research. And that is important because we cannot talk about human rights without the right to participation. Secondly, because for some of us who have studied science from a historical and social perspective, we know that knowledge is never complete. It's always partial. And the experience and ground level knowledge of persons affected by leprosy brings something that scientists, with all their knowledge, cannot grasp. So to make sure that knowledge is more encompassing and also is more impactful and effective when it is applied in real life, as Becky was saying, we need what we call a strong objectivity that only comes from experience and knowledge of what is going on at the community level. That is very clear when we think about implementation of some
immunity, and we may also think that or hope that the adjuvant included in LepVax will boost the immune response. So that is part of what needs to be tested during the clinical trials. There have been questions about the MIP vaccine in India, which I think is similar to BCG in its effect, and so that was covered briefly by Becky. And I think the question of whether whether LepVax could be actually used in a widespread manner really depends on efficacy. So I think that the MIP vaccine is not a great advance on BCG, and LepVax would have to be considerably more effective to be taken up. Maybe I can ask Becky to talk a bit about the funding, because there was a question about funding.
Yes, I can, Paul, I can find funding for our phase 1B trial, which includes the manufacturing of the new batch. At this point in time, we have 31% of the funding needs. Our total amount is 1.5 million US dollars. So we have secured 32% of that. And some of that funding is from ILEP organizations such as LRI. And also we have funds through Fiocruz from the Ministry of Health in Brazil. And HRI has also put in some funds. So we are still looking for a total of $1.037 million to complete the funding before we can actually start manufacturing.
Good, thanks very much. And then also maybe Alice, you would be able to answer the question about vaccine skeptics. So Stephen McCartney writes, vaccine skeptics and voices who are anti-WHO are growing in volume. Is there a plan to counter any disinformation that would hamper the rollout and delivery of LepVax? This is certainly a problem that everybody is discussing in public health. But one of the things that, I find encouraging is that if you go to the poorest communities that are actually affected by these diseases, then they want all these interventions. The people who don't want the interventions generally tend to be people who are rather distant from the disease itself. But Alice, maybe you would.
Sure. Yeah, I think that one thing that it's important, and that is, I think, why I emphasize so much the importance of dialogue. Well, first of all, we know that there is that trend, and unfortunately, I'm not a medical doctor, so maybe Veronica and Becky can talk about it, that we've seen how damaging that is, right? With the comeback of some diseases that were already somehow eradicated or eliminated. So, but I think that in regards to leprosy, I think that it's very much important to make sure that persons affected by leprosy, their organizations and communities really enjoy the right to access to information. I've been advocating for the need to share information in a very comprehensive and very transparent manner. And truly, when people are able to have access to information, even if, sometimes scientists think, oh, they will not understand. No, people do understand, and they do want that information, and they need it to make a decision that, it is based on their own knowledge of the situation. So I think there is a lot of work to be done with the organizations of persons affected by leprosy, who are should be the priority partners in these processes, to make sure that scientific and medical knowledge reaches people at the community level in a way that is, easy to understand, but it cannot be partial. I think, and I've already told this to Paul, I think that is one of the problems we've been facing with STR PEP. Information needs to be complete. And trust me, people will understand. And I cannot speak as a person affected by leprosy, and that is why I invited Paula to be here today. But from my experience in my work with persons affected by leprosy, they want more biomedical technologies and solutions because they do want to see leprosy ending. And the interesting thing about LepVax is that LepVax provides an opportunity for that, but also to prevent physical impairments, which we know are a source of great suffering. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice. Maybe moving on, as you mentioned there, LepVax may have a role in preventing nerve damage, and some of the questions are about that. So maybe Veronica, you would like to speak a bit about that. What is the evidence and what is the hope for LepVax being able to prevent some disabilities in leprosy? Because I think
thank you, Paul.
it can sometimes get too much is built on a very small experiment.
Yes, we have an experiment that it's important to mention that was pivotal for the approval for the regulatory agents, as probably FDA, and I can say for sure for Anvisa, because when we test vaccines, we need experimental models. And it means that we need models that represent the disease like we see in humans. And the model, and we have problem with models, as I briefly mentioned in my presentation. And the model that was used by LepVax project was the armadillo, that recapitulates some aspects of the leprosy, mainly the neural form of the disease. And in this experiment, was very clear that the group was vaccinated with LepVax. There was a delay in the appearance of the nerve damage, and it was strike different from the BCG group, and the other vaccine not related with leprosy was used. And with these results, it was very excited for the scientists, of course, and for all people, I believe, because it was the first time that we have a tool that could delay the nerve damage. And we have this experiment that was running in a good quality way, because it needs to be, because of this kind of project, to be approved for Anvisa. And I don't know if you have more questions about the experiment.
Good. Yeah. So a further comment from Dr. Atul Shah is that we have to separate the two issues, prevention and therapeutic. And that is exactly correct, that there are two lines that are being pursued, the therapeutic use and a preventive use, and they require different clinical trials. And in fact, the discussion 20 years ago, it was thought that it would be easier to get approval for the vaccine as a therapeutic vaccine. And that was before all the work on post-exposure prophylaxis had been done. But I think now there's a feeling that to do a trial of post-exposure prophylaxis would be now relatively straightforward and just as easy or just as difficult as a therapeutic trial. So I think the two they are being treated separately. but they would have different uses, and a therapeutic vaccine would be given alongside MDT to new cases, whereas a prophylactic vaccine would be given to, well, initially to contacts of cases. We're coming up towards the end. Maybe, sorry.
Excuse me, Paul.
Yeah.
I'd like to address the question about from Prakash Dunn about any plans for future trials
Right.
in India, if that's okay. Just so the participants know, we are definitely open to running. We are going to need to run multiple trials in multiple regions to in the phase 2/3 in group of clinical trials, so that we can actually identify enough household contacts of index cases, so that we'll have enough statistical merit for these trials to prove that LepVax is able to prevent leprosy. So we would be very interested in talking to you or your colleagues, and as we move towards the phase 2/3 trials. But just know this phase 1 trial that we're running in Brazil is a pivotal study for both the prophylactic and the therapeutic application of LepVax, and we have to get that done first. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Becky. Yeah, I think in 1 hour we can't cover the whole topic, and there's going to be lots of back and forth, and we will, as Tim has mentioned in the chat, we will send the documentation by email, and there can be further email discussion. But let's finalize, and I think maybe we will have a closing remark from Janine of the Leprosy Mission and Tim Burton.
Thank you, Paul. In 2025, the Leprosy Mission entered a new strategic period, and that strategic period takes us to the end of the decade. So between now and the end of 2030, we want to see great progress towards zero leprosy. Preventing leprosy is key, and LepVax, along the diagnostic tests that are being tested, the post-exposure prophylaxis trials, and rollout that are in place, and lots of other initiatives, are key to preventing infection and preventing disease. There are several research studies taking place around the world that help us to understand how M. leprae is transmitted and how to stop that transmission. Earlier, Becky mentioned the Leprosy Research Initiative, and as one of the funders of LRI, the Leprosy Mission has followed with interest the progress of LepVax. We recognise that there are other vaccines, including MIP, which has also been mentioned, but we've received lots of requests for updates on LepVax in particular, hence this webinar. One of our values at the Leprosy Mission is collaboration. And we know that no single organisation and no single scientist, no single programme can achieve zero leprosy on their own. We're a large organisation with presence in more than 30 countries, but our reach and our impact are magnified when we collaborate and partner with others, not just in research, but in advocacy, in our programming, and in training and building up expertise in leprosy, plus lots of other things, including today's webinar. Becky's presentation demonstrated how much collaboration has already taken place to get LepVax to where it is today. But there is still much to do. Working together is key. On behalf of the Leprosy Mission, I want to thank all of our presenters today Paul Saunderson is chair of our International Research Committee and a long-time friend of the Leprosy Mission. Paul's always here to help us communicate science into easy to understand messages. Thank you, Paul. Veronica Schmitz Pereira and the team at Fiocruz Brazil. Thank you, Veronica, for explaining the science behind LepVax. For those of us who are not scientists, sometimes this is difficult to follow. Thanks for keeping it simple. Becca Rivoire of the Hope Rises International family. We are really pleased to co-host this webinar with Hope Rises. Becky, thank you for giving us your time and explaining the process to date and the steps that are yet to come. We pray, along with you, that the timeline you've presented today will indeed prove to be realistic. Paula Suarez Brandao, thank you for your important reminder that ending leprosy is not only a matter of science. Human rights and partnerships with persons affected by leprosy and their organizations, such as Mohan, are key for us to be able to achieve anything. And Alice from the Sasakawa Health Foundation, thank you for reminding us that science and experience need to be equally valued. The Leprosy Mission Strategy 2025-2030 has partnership with organizations of persons affected by leprosy as a strategic priority. Co-production of knowledge that you mentioned is something that we already do, but we need to do much more. We strongly believe in your call and will answer it to ensure that persons affected have a voice and a place in research and knowledge generation. So in closing, we at the Leprosy Mission are excited to see the progress with LepVax, and we continue to watch what is happening. To directly answer Becky's question at the end, we are interested in being more involved, and when you need more field sites, let us know, and we will contact our field teams. Thank you to everyone for all your interest in this webinar. This is the question we get asked most of the time, I think, related to science things. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Please follow our social media to stay informed of what we're planning, and we'll share the recording of this webinar soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janine. And on that note, we'll close the webinar. Thank you.